cannot the government.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Well, it's been, ladies and gentlemen.
You have a gavel.
Yeah. It's been long in the making, and therefore we can probably feel the agitation and expectations very high in this chamber. Hopefully, we can deliver on all of them during the next several days. So let me start. Honorable Ministers, Director General of the WTO, General Council Chairman, Excellencies, Honorable Delegates and guests. Welcome to the 12th session of the Ministerial Conference of the WTO. I would like to thank all heads of delegation and delegates for their presence here today. Thank you very much for making it here. As chair of the Ministerial Conference, allow me to begin by sincerely thanking all WTO members for having entrusted our country, Kazakhstan, with the co-hosting of MC12 and for my appointment as the chair of the conference. Thank you very much. Thank you. Also, I wish to extend our deep gratitude to the government and the authorities of Swiss Confederation for providing us with the necessary support for this conference. We're also grateful for ensuring safe working conditions for all of us, especially in these difficult times. Finally, let me take this opportunity to thank the 3 vice chairs of this ministerial conference who will assist me during the next few days. The Honorable Don Farrell of Australia, the Honorable Jerome Javier Walcott of Barbados, and the Honorable Harriet Tabazi of Uganda. It is a great honor and a personal pleasure to share the work ahead with all of you. Let me start by giving you some information on the way this opening session will unfold this afternoon. First, I will deliver my own remarks to address the conference. Subsequently, I will give the floor to the WTO Director General, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, to address the conference. Following the DG's statements, the Chair of the General Council, Ambassador Didier Chambovet of Switzerland, will make a statement. He will outline the present state of affairs, and in line with past practice, he will formally transmit the results of the work that has taken place in this intense preparatory period for ministerial consideration. Finally, I will propose that the Ministerial Conference adopts the agenda for MC12. Immediately thereafter, an informal heads of delegation meeting will take place. In this informal meeting, the chairs of negotiating bodies and other chairs working on topics to be considered during the conference will provide a state of play of the current situation. The session will be chaired by the Director General. Immediately after the heads of delegation meeting, a dedicated informal session on the challenges facing the multilateral trading system will take place. This meeting will be chaired by the MC12 Vice Chair, the Honorable Harriet Tabazi of Uganda. Now it is my great pleasure to address the Ministerial Conference. Honorable Ministers, Director General, General Council Chairman, Excellencies, once again, welcome to the 12th WTO Ministerial Conference. Ministers last met almost half a decade ago. A lot has happened since then. The world, the multilateral trading system, and the WTO have faced unprecedented challenges. We're currently living in a once-in-a-generation period that demands collective action from all of us. And MC12 presents a unique opportunity for us to make this happen. Over the next 3 days, the world's eyes are on the WTO. We have a chance to address some of the major challenges facing the global economy. Kazakhstan joined the WTO only in 2015, with big aspirations and hopes in the future of the rules-based multilateral trading system. Despite being the largest landlocked country located at the heart of Eurasia, Kazakhstan has played an important role in deepening trade and investment cooperation between Europe and Asia. And despite the difficult times, we remain firmly committed to strengthening trade and integration and peace and security through the multilateral platforms, including, of course, the WTO. More than 2 years ago, we were all struck by an unprecedented health crisis, and I want to thank all members, especially delegates here in Geneva, for their tireless engagement in advancing the work on the WTO response to the pandemic, including TRIPS waiver. My heartfelt thanks also go to the Director General for her work with various stakeholders and international organizations. My deep gratitude goes to the General Council Chair, the TRIPS Council Chair, and the facilitator on the pandemic response for their excellent leadership and engagement. Addressing the pandemic is an issue of utmost priority, both regarding intellectual property and trade-related aspects. Should WTO members agree on such a framework at this conference, whenever the next pandemic comes, our collective action would be entirely focused on saving lives. Based on the experience and lessons learned from the current pandemic, we must build effective solutions for the future. As the world continues to experience the negative effects of COVID-19, it is faced with another crisis, ongoing, unsettling, and worsening food insecurity. Between 700 and 800 million people in the world face hunger, around 1 in 10, according to UN estimates. Families across the globe experience food shortages and are faced with the rising prices. Hunger is on the rise, and it is our responsibility to deliver meaningful results to help address this issue. As WTO members, we have a duty to develop international markets in a sustainable and inclusive manner. In order for us to make the WTO more responsive to the challenges the world faces today, more relevant in the face of the two global emergencies in front of us, we need to strengthen this organization and reform it. Ensuring that our multilateral negotiating instrument remains fully functional is very critical, especially for the most vulnerable amongst us, the ones that rely on the WTO to have their voices heard on trade-related issues. Over the coming days, I will be counting on your goodwill and your flexibility and open hearts to build the necessary convergence on agriculture, fisheries, subsidies, as well as on the number of other important issues. This week, the ministers have an opportunity to provide both guidance and impetus on how agriculture negotiations will be carried out forward here in Geneva in the coming years. We also have an opportunity to finally curb harmful fisheries subsidies through a balanced package taking into consideration a core principle of this House, special and differential treatment. In addition, we owe the world a declaration that captures our collective resolve and commitment to our future work. It has been close to a decade since ministers agreed on the multilateral ministerial declaration. Let us not deprive this organization of the guidance, of the political guidance that is genuinely needed, particularly during these difficult times. Outstanding work has been done in Geneva to prepare a draft outcome document for MC12, and we appreciate it. We appreciate the tireless efforts by the General Council Chairman and his predecessor, as well as the positive engagement by members. We're extremely grateful to you. I understand that several issues remain to be addressed, and I urge all of you to exercise the necessary flexibility and political will to get the job done here in Geneva. In this regard, crucial issue in the document is reform. All WTO members agree on the importance of effecting meaningful reforms to strengthen the functioning of this organization. We have a chance to set the stage for future work on WTO reform, to make it fit for purpose. Let us seize this opportunity now. Excellencies, the task at hand is clear. There are many issues on the table, and we have a very little time ahead of us to address them. Rest assured that the Director General, the General Council Chair, and myself are here for you every step of the way. Kazakhstan is a firm believer in the multilateral trading system, in the WTO, and in our collective drive and ability to deliver. With this in mind, I look forward to working with the Director General, the General Council Chairman, and all the ministers. Throughout this work, you can count on my unwavering support and determination. As the chair of MC12, I will spare no effort in helping to bridge gaps to secure a meaningful ministerial conference. Let us now roll up our sleeves and go to work. I thank all of you, and I wish good luck to all of us. Thank you very much. Now, with great pleasure, I would like to invite the WTO Director General, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, to address the ministerial conference. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and permit me to speak from the lectern. I'm short, and this is a better way to project. I am so excited to be here. At some point in time, we thought this ministerial would not happen, and here we are. Let me welcome all of you. Chair, His Excellency Timur Suleimanov, First Deputy Chief of Staff of the President of the Republic of Kazakhstan, our MC12 Vice Chairs, His Excellency Senator Jerome Walcott, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade of Barbados, His Excellency Don Farrell, Minister for Trade and Tourism, Australia, Her Excellency Honorable Harriet Ntabazi, Minister of State for Trade, Uganda, the General Council Chair, Ambassador Didier Chambouvet, my DDGs, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome finally to Geneva. I want to start by prefacing that I have quite a long speech. We had a little conspiracy with the chair where he said he would lend me his minutes. So he's spoken for only 6 minutes, and I'm going to speak for about 25. I have a lot to say. This is my first speech. So welcome to Geneva. It's wonderful to see you here in person. No matter how great technology is, nothing can beat an in-person meeting. I want to thank the Swiss authorities for their support and generosity in getting us here. I want to thank the General Council Chair, Ambassador Didier Chambouvet, his predecessor, Ambassador Dacio Castillo, and the wonderful staff of the WTO for their hard work in making this meeting happen. This is my first WTO Ministerial Conference, and it's a great privilege to stand before you as your 15-month-old DG, ready and willing to serve. While I'm proud to be the first woman, that's what everybody talks about it, the first African and the first American in this role, what matters to me more is whether on Wednesday, when we conclude this conference, I'm able to say that I was the DG who stood behind WTO members as they came together and delivered results at a moment when the world really needed them to do so. Will the road to deliver at this MC12 be smooth? Absolutely not. Expect a rocky, bumpy road with a few landmines along the way. But we shall overcome them. As we grapple with uncertainty and crisis on multiple fronts, the war in Ukraine, the inherent international security crisis that comes with it, the health, economic, environmental, and geopolitical crisis, this is a time to demonstrate that multilateralism works. A time to demonstrate that the WTO can deliver for the international community and the people we serve. Nearly 5 years have passed since our last ministerial conference. While many members took some important steps forward in Buenos Aires, for example, on using trade as a vehicle for women's economic empowerment, that meeting didn't really deliver. Although ministers did commit to completing the fisheries subsidies negotiations, they could not even agree on reaffirming the importance of the rules-based multilateral trading system and the WTO's founding principles. A trust deficit dating back to the breakdown of the Doha round and even before took its toll. The media coverage reflected this and was brutal, with uniformly negative headlines about a failing WTO and failing ministers. Permit me to be blunt and say that Geneva has internalized many of these negative messages. The negativism is compounded by the negative advocacy of some think tanks and civil society groups here in Geneva and elsewhere who believe the WTO is not working for people. This is, of course, not true, although we've not been able to clearly demonstrate it. But it worsens the trust deficit that I've noticed in these past 15 months. Despite this, ambassadors have been working very hard, trying to overcome, to work hard together, and working to deliver. I want to say a heartfelt thank you to all the ambassadors in Geneva. I hope as ministers, you can work even better together to complete nearly completed deliverables so this organization can be put back on a results-focused trajectory. I would like you to spend just a little bit of the political capital you have stored for your bilateral and regional deals to support multilateral deals at the WTO. Excellencies, this organization is worth investing in. That's why I came here. It is worth strengthening. The multilateral trading system is a global public good that we have collectively and carefully built up over 75 years. Though certainly not perfect, by historical standards, it has delivered more prosperity to more people than every international economic order that came before it. Today, with history looming over us, with that multilateral system seemingly fragile, this is the time to invest in it, not to retreat from it. This is the time to summon the much-needed political will to show that the WTO can be part of the solution to the multiple crises of the global commons that we face. Excellencies, the challenges we currently confront are also an opportunity. Between now and Wednesday, we have a chance to show the world that the WTO can step up to the plate, that we can act to correct these institutions' problems, to reform and modernize it, that we can strike agreements in Geneva that will enhance the ability of all members to respond to people's aspirations at home. Aspirations for food, for health, for security, for better jobs, higher living standards, and sustainable environment on land, in the oceans, and in our atmosphere. We must show the people who live in my village, who don't know what the WTO is, that the WTO matters. The WTO is about people, and the WTO is for people. Now more than ever, the world needs WTO members to come together and deliver. We also need to deliver for those who seek to join us. The many countries, especially from Africa, Central Asia, and the Middle East, who want to accede to the WTO. If we do not deliver, if we allow or even embrace economic and regulatory fragmentation, the cost to your domestic constituencies will be substantial. Because, as Martin Luther King Jr. said in a different context, and I quote, "We may all have come on different ships, but we're in the same boat now. Either we go up together or we go down together." I certainly don't want to go down, even if I'm in your company. WTO economists estimate that if our interdependent world economy decouples into two self-contained trading blocs, the resulting reduction in specialization and technology spillovers will by themselves lower the long-run level of real global GDP by about 5%. To put this in perspective, the financial crisis of 2008-2009 is estimated to have lowered rich countries' long-run potential output by about 3.5%. And this 5% estimate represents just the start of the economic damage. Additional losses would come from reduced scale economies, transition costs for businesses and workers, disorderly resource allocation, and financial distress. New trade and regulatory barriers within each bloc would add to these costs. A return to the might makes right in international commercial relations would be costly for the mighty and even more damaging for everyone else. Lower-income countries will suffer the biggest losses in potential growth. Trade decoupling would entrench the development setbacks caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, making it much harder for poor countries to catch up with richer ones. This would be a world of diminished opportunities, even greater political anger and social unrest, and intense migratory pressures as people leave in search of better lives elsewhere. the debt problems we're already seeing would get worse. It is in all our interests to keep the multilateral trading system going, so we continue to have clear and predictable terms of commercial engagement across members and alliances. The geopolitical tensions we're dealing with are real. We cannot pretend otherwise, and I wouldn't. But at the same time, it would be a mistake to let these tensions spill over into our work here. If we do, the consequences on the WTO's work and the functions of the multilateral trading system would be severe. Times are difficult, but when the going gets tough, the tough get going. I'm optimistic that with the requisite political will, a word you'll hear from me many times, we can tackle the negotiations in front of us, endorse the declarations, and take the decisions that will show the world that the WTO is part of the solutions to the world's pressing problems. Looking to the busy days ahead of us, Excellencies, we will immediately after this session begin an exchange of views on challenges facing the multilateral trading system. An unprecedented 103 members and observers have expressed interest in taking the floor this session. In the plenaries of the past, the average has been around 60. The high number of interventions is a testament both to the WTO's relevance and the challenging conjuncture we are in. I hope this session will enable ministers to jump into action tomorrow to tackle the full agenda we have in front of us for MC12. Starting tomorrow morning, we will take decisions that respond to ongoing emergencies, particularly in response to the pandemic and to the food crisis. We will then have further thematic sessions on agriculture, in fisheries, WTO reform, the e-commerce work program, and moratorium. Together with informal meetings in different configurations, these are designed to position ourselves to deliver results. As you know, Excellencies, your capital-based officials and your teams here in Geneva have been working very hard to lay the groundwork for success at MC12. You have received the various draft texts, declarations, and decisions sent to you. WTO members must respond to global crises with a sense of urgency. In this regard, you will have to complete the work that will allow the WTO to have a holistic response to this pandemic and to future ones. This consists of two parts: a trade and health declaration and a legally binding agreement on a TRIPS waiver. Getting these documents to you has been a painful process of tough negotiations after almost 2 years of little movement on the latter issue. I want to thank all of you, the Quad, so-called Quad countries or members, the ambassadors, negotiators, experts, ministers, who did the groundwork that got us to this point, and the staff of the WTO who backed it up. What remains to be decided requires political will. There we go again. And I know you have it, to get us over the finish line. Getting agreement on the response to the pandemic will enable millions of people to access affordable vaccines and medical countermeasures in this and future pandemics. The WTO must also respond to the looming food crisis. Droughts, floods, heat waves, and other extreme weather events had already combined with COVID-19 and pandemic-related supply chain bottlenecks to lead us to rising food prices around the world. The war in Ukraine has escalated this situation. According to the UN Food and Agricultural Organization, international wheat prices have increased 56% compared to last May. Overall, cereal prices are up nearly 30%. Recent prices for vegetable oils are 45% higher year on year, and the World Bank's index of fertilizer prices in low and middle-income countries is 128% higher than it was a year ago. Economies everywhere are facing inflationary pressures, with high food and energy prices hitting poor people the hardest. Though Russia and Ukraine make up less than 3% of world goods trade, they loom large in exports of key foodstuffs, accounting in 2019 for 25% of internationally traded wheat, 15% of barley, and together with Belarus, 20% of fertilizer. Many low and middle-income countries import a substantial percentage of their food and agricultural inputs from this region. For example, 35 countries in Africa import food products and 22 import fertilizer from the Black Sea region. Low-income countries face a catastrophic situation if action is not taken at both the national and international levels. WTO members can contribute by allowing the free flow of food and agricultural inputs, especially for humanitarian purposes. The draft ministerial decision on exempting World Food Programme humanitarian purchases from export restrictions and the draft ministerial declaration on trade and food security give you, ministers, a chance to make WTO members part of the multilateral solution to this crisis that we face. This must be coupled with support to poor countries rich in land and natural resources to produce more of their own food. In this regard, we appreciate the various initiatives at the World Bank, the African Development Bank, the EU Presidency's Farm Initiative to provide such support. I hope you'll collectively do the right thing and approve the proposals before us tomorrow. Turning now to some long-standing issues. Agriculture is so central to the functioning of each and every country, poor or rich, big or small. Domestic politics surrounding the sector are often fierce. Agricultural negotiations have been going on for 2.5 decades or more, longer than fisheries subsidies, with few breakthrough agreements apart from the last one on export subsidies in Nairobi in 2015. Many mandates and ministerial decisions in agriculture have gone unimplemented. And in fact, for almost a decade now, there's been no agreed text to work on, and consequently, no text-based negotiations. Many members or groups of members have their own special areas of priority within the agriculture agenda: public stock holding, domestic support, special safeguard mechanisms, market access, cotton, and so forth. With no consensus this year on how to deliver on mandates or priority areas, we have attempted to put in front of ministers a draft decision that will ensure work continues on agriculture post-MC12. I want to thank Ambassador Gloria Abraham Peralta and the staff of the Agriculture Unit and the Secretariat's Delivery Unit for the hard work that has gone into making this happen. We hope ministers will adopt this decision to give impetus to the agriculture negotiations and to the implementation of already agreed and existing mandates. This notwithstanding, several members and groups of members have put forward their own priorities on agriculture for decisions or adoption. I hope ministers in all this will find a way forward for agriculture post-MC12. We must not let agriculture drop by the wayside because of our differences. Turning now to fisheries, I want to start off by thanking the chair of the Fisheries Subsidies Negotiations, Ambassador Santiago Wills, and the whole team supporting him for their work on the prospective agreement to curb harmful fisheries that contribute to overcapacity and overfishing, and to eliminate subsidies that contribute to illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. This prospective work beautifully illustrates the WTO's founding purpose, enshrined in the Marrakesh Preamble, which is to enhance people's living standards, create employment, and support sustainable development. This agreement is crucial to the 260 million people around the world whose livelihoods depend directly or indirectly on marine fisheries. It is also central to the sustainability of our oceans, where the latest studies show close to 50% of stocks for which we have data are overfished. Delivering fisheries is delivering SDG 14.6. I repeat that 21 years is enough. How long will we wait to contribute meaningfully to the world's sustainable development goals? Will our children forgive us? Will poor fisher women and men forgive us if we allow our oceans to be depleted? The UN Oceans Conference 2 weeks from now And the world has sent word that they will demand accountability from the WTO there. So, dear friends, honorable ministers, let us rise to the occasion and deliver once and for all an agreement to discipline harmful fisheries subsidies. Now, on WTO reform, it is clear that our core monitoring, negotiations, and dispute settlement functions have not evolved in a manner that adequately captures the fast economic and technological developments of our time. On negotiations, it is important to reaffirm that the multilateral approach, the single undertaking, is by far the preferred instrument. But is it the only one? Might a toolbox of different negotiating instruments or approaches be appropriate? The multilateral approach has delivered little in recent years, prompting many to turn out of frustration to plurilaterals. Our consensus decision-making approach, while democratic and egalitarian, qualities which are totally to be applauded, often leads to gridlock, since just one member can hold up what might be a potentially good agreement, supported by many more. We must reflect hard on how to modernize our negotiating function and innovate new approaches whilst improving existing ones. I repeat again, the multilateral instrument is the best one. We have to invest in it. The way we negotiate agreements, with talks dragging unnecessarily for several years, is in turn linked to fear of being caught in our dispute settlement system. So every word, every comma, perhaps quite rightly, I'm not a lawyer, is passed for its legal meaning or potential interpretation. Top of the WTO reform list for most members is reform of our dispute settlement system and its two-tier approach with the appellate body. I'm happy to say that outreach among members at technical level has now begun to point to what shape or form such reform might take. Our monitoring, notification, and transparency functions also need to be strengthened and capacity built where it is needed by developing and least developed countries for more effective participation. Excellencies, there's little doubt that if we want a WTO for the future, we must place these aspects of WTO reform at the center of our work. A crucial part of reform is making sure the WTO delivers to our developing and least developed country members. That is why reaffirming the importance of special and differential treatment within the WTO is so significant. Our founding agreements call for positive effort to ensure that developing and especially least developed countries are able to use trade to drive their economic development. Trade is an instrument for development. It's not an end in itself. In fact, tapping into international markets for value-added goods and services has been history's most proven path towards development. But too many of our members have not been able to start or to stay on this path. That is why special and differential treatment remains necessary. It would be great if members that don't need S&DT because they're on the right track make clear they won't avail of it, so that flexibilities can go to those who need them. The priorities of LDCs naturally deserve particular attention. Some of them have done well enough to graduate and are keen to smooth any bumps that might come with that step. We must also not forget the issues of the Cotton 4, which provide a test of the WTO's ability to deliver for the poorest countries. Other aspects of reform include dealing with industrial, agricultural, and other types of subsidies and level playing field issues so that the rules-based multilateral trading system can continue to be predictable and transparent, ensuring fair competition and a free flow of goods and services. Reform also means using trade as a tool for socio-economic inclusion by supporting women and micro, small, and medium enterprises to become part of regional and global value chains. In this regard, I hope we can overcome our differences in our outcome document so that women can feature as a part of what we say. Trade is going digital, and trade is going green. Reform means making the WTO fit for purpose to embrace and navigate these new areas. Forging agreements that underpin the services economy, e-commerce, and green trade in line with the net zero carbon emissions target for 2050 will all be essential. I'm happy to say WTO members are already delivering in these new areas, be it through the Services Domestic Regulation Agreement reached last December, the e-commerce and investment facilitation negotiations, or the structured discussions on environmental sustainability, climate change, and trade, and of course, the informal working group on women. One important decision before you in the area of digital trade is the issue of the moratorium on levying customs duties on electronic transmissions. I've never received so many letters from business associations all over the world as I have on this issue. I hope ministers will have the courage to make the right decision in this critical area. So what are we seeking at MC12 in terms of movement on WTO reform? We are seeking a decision on process. What approach should the WTO follow to pursue these reforms? What approach would facilitate agreement on the substance of reforms, a work program and a timeline for starting to deliver changes by MC13? Excellencies, it will be important for these organizations' credibility to achieve consensus on the process for reforms. Excellencies, the agenda before us at MC12 is an exciting one, but it is also a difficult one. In the next 3 days, we will have to work hard to forge consensus and deliver on the agreements, declarations, and decisions before us. Ministers, my dream is that we deliver on this agenda. But it was Ellen Johnson Sirleaf who said, and I quote, "The size of your dreams must always exceed your current capacity to achieve them." She's right. But dreams are also achieved one step at a time. All of you know that system overload is a real risk in any negotiation. 3 deliverables are better than 2, and 2 are better than 1. But even one result is a bigger step towards our dreams than all of us would wish, going home empty-handed. Let me conclude, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, by saying this: we can and we should deliver. Nelson Mandela said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." Please, let's go and do it. Let's make MC12 a conference at whose end we shall celebrate success and know that we have laid the foundation for a life post-MC12, going towards MC13. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you again to this WTO Secretariat staff for making this happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your address, Director General. And once again, sincere thanks for your leadership and tremendous work, especially in the month and days preceding the conference. I must say I have the same dream, and hopefully, starting from today, we will all have the same dream of achieving a very successful conference. I now would like to invite the Chair of the General Council, Ambassador Didier Chambouvet of Switzerland, to address the Ministerial Conference. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your Excellency, Mr. Suleimanov, Chair of the Ministerial Conference, Honourable Ministers, Director General, distinguished delegates and guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is a great honour and privilege for me to address you at this 12th session of the WTO Ministerial Conference. On behalf of the WTO membership, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the government of Kazakhstan and to the WTO led by the Director General, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, for co-hosting this conference. Our deep gratitude also goes to you, Excellency, Mr. Suleimanov, for your continued commitment in chairing this conference. This conference brings you, the ministers, together after almost 5 years. During this time, our organization has faced challenges across its functions. However, It has never ceased in its efforts to support the multilateral trading system as a tool to improve people's lives. Your presence here, honourable ministers, will provide us with the much-needed impetus to strengthen and invigorate this fundamental role of the WTO. Before you are the annual reports that document the work of the organisation, which were to be submitted to you when the conference was postponed last year. Since the circulation of these annual reports, work has continued in all areas, with some notable results. Allow me to highlight some of them to you. In March this year, the General Council adopted a decision on tariff rate quota administration in the area of agriculture, which was a direct follow-up to the mandate that ministers gave in Bali at the 9th Ministerial Conference. In April, the Committee on Rules of Origin also adopted a decision in direct follow-up to a mandate from the 10th Ministerial Conference. Furthermore, in February this year, the General Council agreed to establish the Working Party on the accession of Turkmenistan. This is another step towards achieving the organization's aim of universal membership. I also have the pleasure to report to you that, just before the conference was postponed last year, the General Council had agreed to forward 2 draft decisions which are before you for adoption. One decision on the work programme on small economies and another decision on the moratorium on TRIPS non-violation and situation complaints. In addition, let me draw your attention to a draft sanitary and phytosanitary declaration for the 12th WTO Ministerial Conference, responding to modern SPS challenges. I have been informed that the 2 remaining reservations made at the 7th of June special meeting of the General Council regarding this draft declaration have now been lifted. Therefore, I take it that this declaration can be adopted by you, the ministers, at this conference. In parallel to this work, members have worked tirelessly in several different areas in preparation for this ministerial in an effort to achieve results. These efforts have led to the draft texts that are before you for your consideration during this conference. You will have an opportunity to hear detailed reports on the state of play in the respective areas immediately after this opening session. Let me seize this opportunity to report on the draft ministerial outcome document. Consultations began last year, led by my predecessor as chair of the General Council, Ambassador Dacio Castillo of Honduras. I am grateful for his commitment, perseverance and achievements. The draft outcome document would provide the organization with much-needed ministerial guidance. The key issue that will need your attention relates to WTO reform to improve all its functions. Discussions over the last year have shown that this is a matter of crucial importance to all members. Tangible progress has been made on this issue, although one specific aspect of the modalities of the work to be undertaken remains to be settled. The other outstanding issues relate to the paragraphs on women economic empowerment, micro, small and medium-sized enterprises and environment. I understand that discussions between members on these 3 paragraphs are continuing with a view to finding a consensus. We count on your leadership as ministers to bridge the remaining gaps. On electronic commerce, in December 2019, the General Council adopted a decision on the work programme. In that decision, the General Council was instructed to periodically review progress and to report to this ministerial conference. Since the last ministerial conference, discussions on e-commerce have continued as reflected in the respective annual reports. 2 draft ministerial decisions were received and are before you. One calls for the continuation of the work programme and the extension of the moratorium on customs duties on electronic transmissions until the next ministerial conference. The other contains language recognizing the development challenges and calls for the reinvigoration and continuation of the work programme until the next ministerial conference. The main divergence relates to whether or not the moratorium should be extended. Despite efforts to bridge the gaps, members could not agree on a single draft ministerial decision. Hence, two separate draft decisions are before you. I very much hope that this ministerial conference will enable members to find a mutually acceptable solution. I should also note that members have been active in tabling proposals on a range of matters, including proposals by the LDC group, the least developed countries group, related to a smooth transition package in favour of members graduating from the LDC category. Despite positive exchanges, differences remain. However, I have observed a strong backing of the membership to support LDCs in their integration into the multilateral trading system. Honourable Ministers, as Chair of the General Council, you have my continuous engagement to work with everyone to reach convergence. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Chambové, and I would like to sincerely thank you for your tireless work in preparation for today's conference. I now propose that we proceed with the adoption of the agenda of this 12th Ministerial Conference. In line with the rules of procedure for the Ministerial Conference, the agenda was circulated on May 6th in the document WT/Min22/W/1. The modalities for the conference are further clarified in document WT/Min22/Inf/9. The agenda contains 4 items. Item 1, overview of WTO activities. Under this item, general statements are traditionally made during the plenary session. However, in line with the view of members to structure this conference in a business-like and streamlined format, and in order to effectively and urgently respond to the challenges faced by the world and the WTO, general statements have been pre-recorded. Thus, general statements will be available on the WTO website, as well as streamed in several locations throughout the WTO building from 13th to 15th June. Item 2, action by ministers relates to any decisions or actions that the Ministerial Conference deems appropriate and will normally be taken up at the closing session of the conference. To prepare the finalization of such action, several informal sessions will be convened from June 13th to 15th. Items 3 and 4 concern the date and venue, as well as the election of officers for MC13 respectively, and will be taken up at the closing session of the conference. In line with past practice, ministers and heads of delegations will mandate their General Council to take up the agenda items after the conference. With these remarks, I now propose that the agenda be adopted. Thank you. The agenda is adopted.